So the MacGuffin, I hear is what you guys are wanting to hear about here.
Yes, definitely I do. I mean, we did talk about it a little bit, but I think that it is such a cool concept that our listeners and viewers should know more about it, and so we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. So for those of you that are elementary on the MacGuffin out there, it hasn't gone worldwide yet. We're still working on that. I'd say it's more regional at this point, even though through the means of the internet, it's reached all parts of the country. Basically, what the MacGuffin is the transitive property or the tidal belt or the lineal belt, however you want to describe it. But basically, transferring from the winner of each game, starting with the very first game in college football history. So that's way back in 1869. Rutgers and Princeton play each other. Winner of that game gets the quote unquote MacGuffin. And so the initial pushback I always get from people when I pitch this concept is they're like, well, why don't you just call it, the tidal belt or the lineal belt or the transitive property? And I don't know why, because the MacGuffin, it just is a word that has really stuck with me. And the MacGuffin initially comes from Alfred Hitchcock, who is a director that a lot of the younger, I'm probably not even supposed to know that he's a thing, that he exists, but it's a term he coined that's in the movie industry, and it's a plot device that doesn't matter what it is. It can be literally anything, and its sole purpose is to drive the plot forward. So some examples of a MacGuffin in movies would be like the Death Star plans in Star Wars, right? Could be anything. Hey, we have to get this, the Death Star plans, or there's the idol at the beginning of Indiana Jones, which is coincidentally what was my profile picture for a while on Twitter.
Nice. So I have to ask, like, what motivated you or drove you to like go down this road? Like, were you just sitting around one day and you're like, you know what, like, let's go back to the beginning of time in college football and find out who won the first game and just who kept winning from that point? I mean, where did you get this idea?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that makes college football so unique as a sport is this type of like concept is something people really can cling to, because there's a lot of teams in college football. There's over 130 now, and not everyone can win the title every year. And there's such a small fraction of teams that can compete for the title. So fans look for other things to sort of cling to. And so, me being a lowly and humble Oregon State fan, I didn't have national titles to cling to, but I kind of just was sitting on one. It was probably the middle of the summer, so like no real sports going on, and I believe it was 2018. So just summer vacation for me, because I was back in high school back then, and I just was like, I just like thought of it in my head, and I almost couldn't put it into words, because when you've been explained what it is, it makes sense. You're like, yeah, the transitive property, like each team passes it on through wind, but trying to put that in the words is hard, and I find it's still kind of hard sometimes to put into words. And so I remember trying to like explain it to my dad, and he was like looking at me like I was crazy. And so then I just started. I just looked up like, okay, first college football game. Okay, there's that one. Okay, who won this game? And definitely starts to get a little complicated. There's times where the records aren't there, the data isn't there. You have to like go look through like old yearbooks or like old archived articles and just stuff like that to find the results. But I mean, really, I think it boils down to answer your question as the nature of college football, finding obscure things to cling to.
You must have learned a lot doing that, though.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Like, you just learn so many things that, like, as a younger person, I didn't necessarily know. Like, I'm trying to think of what some of the more surprising teams. Like, I obviously knew about like Miami's run, and I knew, some of those other teams were really good. But I do remember there were things that surprised me. The beginning, you can't really learn much because you've just got like 8 teams that exist. But I think it was Tulane was in the SEC for the longest time. That was something that blew my mind. I had no idea that was a thing. But you do learn quite a bit just going through the archives of college football, I found.
Yeah, and traveling trophies, because I kind of look at this as a traveling trophy of sorts, right? And traveling trophies are definitely ingrained in the tradition of college football. And but what I want to know is you explain how you had to dig a little bit for some of these different results. Was there somewhere you really got hung up and you weren't sure if you were gonna be able to find the answer to move on?
Yeah, in like the 1930s, I think St. Mary's College, I can't remember if it was St. Mary's or it might have been like UCLA or something. It had to have been St. Mary's. They lost to a team that was not a college team. I think they lost to like a high school team. And so I had no idea what to do with that information, and I was really confused. It actually might have been the 1920s now that I think about it. So I remember I went back and forth on like what I should do with that because it was such a bizarre occurrence. But if I remember correctly, it creates like a branch in the MacGuffin path, and both the branches eventually converge, and it gets back in rhythm on the same thing, which is pretty neat. And it converged in like 10 years. So, it just shows the MacGuffin is true and it'll always find its way back to itself.
That's amazing. So you have basically created like Albert Einstein's theory for college football. And like, were you nervous though that the path wasn't going to converge? Like that, because you spent time doing this. So you've valuable time looking this up. And now you're like, okay, there's two branches. What happens if they never converge? This is a sham? Or were you just like, I'm going with it?
I mean, eventually, I'm sure if one of them got too weird, I was just going to be like, okay, this one's the canon line, and that can just be like an honorable mention thing. Something that recently a lot of people really wanted it, and I knew it was going to be a mess, so I kept putting it off. People wanted the reverse MacGuffin, or I like to call it, what is it, Chekhov's MacGuffin, because that's the opposite of a MacGuffin is Chekhov's gun. And that one is a complete disaster. That was the biggest dumpster fire because you get 3 years into it and you're just like, okay, they just lost to like a middle school boys club or something like that. That didn't happen. But stuff like that and like teams canceling their football programs, like that was a complete disaster. So at least with the MacGuffin, you're able to stick with teams that are winning more routinely. So the records are better kept usually.
Yeah, I watched that video and I was like, man, this is a mess. And like the fact that you hung with it as long as you did was really impressive. And just all the random teams that, just like you said, cease to exist or whatever else. And it's funny, like what I think about when I was hearing you read off some of those teams that were involved, like, so I live in Peoria, Illinois, and it's home to Bradley University. So Bradley's a mid-major basketball program. And one of their claims to fame is they went to back in the day, you could go to both the NIT and the NCAA, and they were, I think it was 1955, they played in both the NIT and NCAA national championship against the City College of New York. So it's like if I'm telling people about the history of Bradley, I'm like, well, they've been in the national championship. Like, well, who'd they lose to? Expecting you're going to say like Duke, Kentucky, Kansas. Oh, well, the City College of New York, who does, it's like not a Division I school. I don't even know if it is a school anymore, if they turned into like NYU or whatever. But it's just funny, all those like back then, it's almost like high schools now, right? Every little town had a high school, and they all competed in sports, and they've all consolidated or closed. It's kind of weird to think of college athletics doing the same thing.
Got a funny tangent on Peoria, actually. My first beat covering in college, like my freshman year, was Peoria, Arizona. And so I had to turn like Google alerts on for Peoria and like, had to like keep track of the stories there because I went to journalism school. And I would always, all the time this would happen, I'd find like a news story, I'd be like, that's awesome. And then I'd look and I'd be like, Peoria, Illinois, dang it, like so close. So I actually have a weird relationship with Peoria, Illinois, as it is already.
Yeah, it's definitely weird you see that pop up, and I know there's a lot of like the world headquarters of Caterpillar was in Peoria for a really, really long time, and so people retire and everything else. There's a ton of Peorians, if you will, that are not retired to Arizona. It happened, it's just I'm sure there's a large population down there, and that probably happens from everywhere in the Midwest. I'm sure that Peoria or Illinois is not unique to that. But I know that there's Peoria Airport. There's maybe 8 flights, 8 cities they fly out to, but Phoenix is one of them. It's just a very busy, I don't know what you call it, lane of traffic for people around here.
This was fate, folks.
It was. I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone from Peoria, Illinois.
That's excellent. Me too, by the way. So, Tyler, I have a question for you because I'm thinking in my head as you're talking about how college football fans, they love to grasp onto things. And I think sports fans in general love to track things, title belts, things like that. And for the NFL, fantasy football has become something that people gravitate toward. Like, you don't have to be super into football, but it gives you something to latch onto that makes you more invested in the product. You're already invested in college football, but has going through all of this and now tracking it up until now, like who the MacGuffin is heading into the season, and you're going to track it through the season. Does that give you even more love for the sport to have this other entity that you've created and tracked your whole existence as a student? Does it give you more oomph when you're watching the product?
Yeah, 100%. I already love the sport, and obviously you've got to love the sport to do something as psychotic as this in your free time. And it's just awesome. I I've like gone back, I've done the math, I've crunched the numbers to see if I was ever at a MacGuffin game. I've never been to one. So that's something that I think I'll always be chasing. And I remember I was in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho when the MacGuffin game was happening in Pullman, and I was like looking up like how far of a distance it was. But I was with my girlfriend's relatives visiting, so I couldn't convince anyone to drive me up there. Didn't even try because I knew that would be, that'd be a bad look. But it definitely gives it an extra oomph. And what gets me just excited is seeing other people get excited about it, and seeing people commenting like, "Where's the MacGuffin? Like, what do you think's going to happen?" My most common request on my account it's got to be people just asking for MacGuffin path predictions for MacGuffin history, and there's so much to like unpack and to dig into that like it just is like from a content perspective it's great because it's just basically unlimited content, and also from a fan perspective it's amazing because it does give an extra game just an extra oomph every week. And then when the stakes get bigger, like when the MacGuffin was at College Game Day last year, UCLA Oregon, it just gets more and more hype.
So I'm predicting this now, because it happened to Barstool Sports when they blew up, and CF Budge is on its way to becoming a really big deal. Down the road, 5 years, 10 years, there will be the Budge Bowl, and it can be for the MacGuffin, so that's what you got to set it up as. Whoever currently holds the MacGuffin against, you could find a conference champ you want to pull into it, or maybe just an at-large or whatever else that is for the MacGuffin every year to finish the season. And I think it would rival the national championship.
I was gonna say I'd have to compete with the playoff if the MacGuffin holder was ever highly ranked enough, which with the expanded playoff that's going to be even harder to do. But I'd never be able to do that because my at-large bid would be the MAC conference because the MAC has never held the MacGuffin. So
Coach is a big Maction fan. Just about every year he tries to sell people on, hey, you're missing out on Thursday night Maction or Friday night Maction.
Absolutely.
You're missing out on Tuesday night Maction.
We talk about that during the football season, how like right now, I mean, you can pretty much find football on TV almost 7 days a week in the fall. It's real close to it anymore. You might get maybe Wednesday off, possibly, but between the MAC, the Monday Night Football, Thursday night game, I think there's some games on Friday nights even now, and I know the Big Ten at once upon a time was playing on Friday nights a little bit. Is the Pac-12 playing on Fridays occasionally?
Oh yeah, they're playing
Yeah.
on Fridays frequently.
So
That's where the weird stuff happens.
yeah, and so I mean, we just have 7 days a week of football or nearly in the fall, and I love it, man. I wouldn't have it any other way, seriously.
I agree.
So, Tyler, you picked TikTok as your social media avenue of choice, or at least your main one. Very smart because I think short content or shorter content seems to be what's driving, as we do an hour-long podcast right now. But have you found it to be stressful? Have you found it to be easier? Because your content is very simple and it's very effective, and you have cornered a market that I haven't seen anybody else corner. As a matter of fact, I've seen other people imitating what you're doing, not as well, by the way, for the NFL, but how has that journey been for you? Because TikTok is sort of a newer anomaly in the social media space.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing because yes, not necessarily even my generation, even younger than my generation, the attention spans are just absolutely through the floor. Like longer than a minute, and most kids are just absolutely out. They're out, and so it's an interesting balance because TikTok also wants creators to be producing longer, like, and I say longer, like over a minute long content. They don't like short, like clips. They don't want to become the next like Vine where they're doing like 7-second clips. So I don't necessarily find it stressful. I actually enjoy the short form video. And I find it really easy to get like ideas across. And if a video or an idea is ever too long, I'll just split it up into multiple parts, and that's multiple parts getting people to come back. But I mean, the attention span for this young generation, you've got to hook them. Like you've got to have a hook in the first 2 seconds of the video where you're loud and you're in like. That's why in most of the videos, if you just go through and you have like a series of my videos in a row, every video I'm up like in the camera and I'm like, who is did it? Like it is a loud like hook delivery because if you don't get them right off the bat, they're just gone. Like I don't know if you've seen the memes or any of the references, but it's a thing where they'll have like a movie clip posted up here, and then there's like a Subway Surfers clip, or it'll be like a Family Guy clip in the bottom because the first clip isn't enough to get the kids' attention. They need something else to stimulate them while it's developing or whatever. So it's pretty bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we have yet to figure that part out because we're not loud and right in the camera. But the attention span part is definitely true. I know I have that fight sometimes with Coach and some other people that we know in podcasting. But my question also is, how do you deal with the negativity? Because I know as you get larger, and we're nowhere near where you are. So at this point, I would assume that you've had trolls, you've had haters come by. Do you just let it sort of roll off, or was it a hard thing to ignore at first?
Yeah, I'd say it was definitely a hard thing to ignore at first. I mean, it's something where just your natural online instinct, and especially my natural online instinct as a sports fan, is to engage in a commentary, and sometimes it gets ugly, it turns into an argument, and that's just the nature of sports fans. You're both passionate. It's my team's better than your team, or this is done because of this, and so your natural instinct online is to reply and to start you know that conversation that's bound to turn into an argument. And so I think that is something that I struggled with a little bit early on. I remember I would engage with people that were commenting stuff like that, and not even necessarily just tied to sports, but just like either hateful stuff or just negativity. Like they'll try to like discredit you or whatever. And I've found that that's never good. It never leads to anything good, especially when your face is out there, when your brand is out there, because no one's going to remember user 1384 in that argument. Everyone's going to remember CF Budge in that argument. So as things have gone on and as I've had more of like an internet footprint, I've definitely gotten a lot better at just letting things roll off my shoulders and just on to the next. Unless it's like I'm getting like ratioed by a stitch, and then I'll just respond with a video. I find that engaging in the comments is never like it's almost never productive. My favorite activity is just responding to comments with the handshake emoji or with like a question emoji if I like disagree with them, because no one can get mad at emojis. But I've definitely found it's best to just let it roll off your shoulders and just go about your day.
What I would find most frustrating in your shoes is especially when it's people arguing about maybe a take that you have or a video you've done, that are fans of other teams, is in most cases you probably know more about their team than they do. And so it's got to be really hard for you to kind of hold back sometimes because we talk about on our show about fan is short for fanatic, right? And logic and reason is not a big part of fanaticism in any way, shape, or form. It's just blind loyalty. And you, yes, you have teams you're a fan of, but you're able to step back and you just love college football and all the stats and history that come along with it, and you invest your time in studying these things. So it does have to be incredibly frustrating once in a while to deal with some of the pushback you do get because you definitely know more about what's happening with a lot of these teams than most people out there.
Yeah, I do find it. One of the things that drives me, I think, the most insane is when, and I've learned to just let this like humor me as much as bother me. But I'll have a guy with a Michigan profile picture comment Michigan too low or something like that, and I'm just like, how do you like? Are you not making the connection here? Are you not like connecting the dots? Like, I think there might be a little bias here. So I found I typically don't try to respond to those comments, and other people in the comment section will usually correct them for me. But I find if I ever respond to something like that, it's with just my own video, just talking about how this misconception exists. Like I say a Michigan guy because I actually made a video. I posted it today talking about how I think J.J. McCarthy's overrated, and that Michigan fans have been hyping him up a lot. So I tend to just like to respond in a way where I can kind of control the dialogue, and that's what the benefit I get from having my platform, and most of those people commenting not necessarily having a platform. So I find that's the best way to respond and get all your thoughts across, because there's only so many characters in a comment, and there's only so many characters to be civilized in a comment. So yeah, it's something that bothers me a little. But to their fans' credit, there's 133 college football teams. So like, I'm not going to be as well versed on all of them as a true like fan. Like there might be a fan, and if they're looking at the right stuff and they're actually like up to date on their team and they've actually done that work, I have no doubt that a Virginia Tech fan could be more well versed on their team than me. I know some of the key details. I know what I know, and I know what I think. But it's not, it's obviously not the end all be all. But there are times, yes, where the blind loyalty definitely clouds the judgment, and you can even point to something as simple as like, hey, Boston College fans, your over-under win total is 4.5 this offseason. You're not winning 8 games. And, oh, well, I don't know. And it's just like, okay.
Well, it happens every year in the NFL when the schedule comes out. All of these franchises, let's take Jets, Browns, Lions, they always go through the schedule and they're like 14-2, 14-3. And you're like, what? Like you were 2-15 last year. How are you going to do that? And college fans have to be even more so that way because I have found, especially in the South and in areas where they're not as highly populated, those college teams are like their pro teams and they are rabid about their fandom. And it's everywhere, but I'm saying there are pockets in this country where they feel that way. Like in the Northeast, Boston College fans will come at you, but they have other things that they're worrying about, like Red Sox and Patriots and stuff like that. But when you get these areas where there's not a heavy pro presence, I could see that, and I just love how you navigate that by taking the reins and making a video about it instead of getting in there in the comments. And I know I can learn something from that myself.
Yeah, it can be the comment section can be a brutal place, but I mean, in reference to the hype or delusion by the fan base with no pro teams. Look what happened with Nebraska every year. They've been a team that is consistently the hype train gets rolling in the offseason, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, what's going on over there?
Yeah, Nebraska fans were the first fan base we pissed off when we first started the show because we were not very kind to Scott Frost, and he ended up getting fired very shortly into the season. So we felt a little bit liberated on that. But Tyler, before we move on to actual football for this upcoming season, is there anything else you'd like the viewers or the listeners to know about your TikTok or something that maybe was an interesting part of the journey to get you where you are here?
I'd say that the journey itself is not going to be all too interesting because all it was just consistently uploading quality content and consistently uploading my ideas and doing that every day. And so I truly believe that anybody that does that consistently on any platform, not just TikTok, I think that there's a niche of people out there that are there to listen. And as long as you're consistently putting out quality content, someone's going to find it eventually. So I think that just happened really fast, really recently, which is pretty awesome.
Well, don't forget, support Tyler and everything he has going on. You can find the handle to TikTok scrolling below on YouTube and in the show notes. And also, if you have an opinion that you want to give to Tyler or us about something that he said, you can call or text the show. 703-718-6314 is the number to do that. So college football, the season is right around the corner. I want to start talking about college realignment or conference realignment because there's been a lot of things happen in the news. So right now, recently, we had Colorado jump to the Big 12 and everything Coach Prime has. And I believe the rumor on the street is the Big 10 is trying to add 4 more teams. I believe that includes Florida State, Clemson, Oregon. Can't remember the other teams. But it looks like this is all starting to reach a fever pitch with this new expanded playoff coming up.